Yeah, okay. I'll get them. Everybody's here. Ready? Right, I see that. Thank you. Okay, would like to reconvene to public session, the regular meeting of the Board of Education on May 10th, 2023 at 7:11 p.m. And if we could stand and salute the flag and have a moment of silence. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Please be seated. Okay, recommend approving tonight's agenda as submitted.
So moved.
First, Mrs. Pugh.
Second.
Second, Mrs. Isler. Roll call vote. Mrs. Pugh?
Approved.
Mrs. Isler?
Approved.
And Mr. Nichols? Approved. So approved. Recommend the approval of the minutes of the Board of Education regular meeting of April 19th, 2023.
So moved.
First, Mrs. Isler. Second, Mr. Nichols. Roll call vote. Mrs. Isler?
Approved.
Mr. Nichols? Approved. And Mrs. Pugh?
Approved.
So approved. Tonight, we were supposed to have, and I don't know if they forgot or, okay, which the Laurel Middle High School All-State Band, All-State Orchestra, Sussex County Senior Honors Band, and Sussex County Junior Honors Band. So, we'll bring them back. All right, next we have communication from the board, and I'm gonna start this one first, this month. First of all, I would like to congratulate Mrs. Isler on her re-election to the board, which she'll be sworn in July at the reorganization meeting. And also thank Mrs. Bonk that I've yet to meet. I wanted to meet her, and I didn't see her at the polls anywhere. So, but congratulate for her jumping in and running for the school board. I do want to point out 11 school districts had school board elections yesterday. And out of the 11, Laurel School District had the lowest turnout, 2.25%. That's pitiful. And I'm I'm born bulldog really, and in competition with the schools around us, you had Del Mar that beat us. They had 10.3%, which is still pitiful. And then you had Seaford that had 4.62%, which is also pitiful turnout. This is where everyone needs to get involved. And it starts at board meetings, and then it starts at school districts and coming in. And it's sad because it's just sad. It's just sad with the turnout. It was pitiful all over the state. I've only seen one huge board meeting that was probably 12 years ago here at Laurel that probably 3,000 voted, something like that. That was the huge turnout, but there was controversy going on with that one. So anyway, I congratulate you, Mrs. Isler, and welcome you back for you to be sworn back in July. Would you like to say next?
I would like to say thank you to all of many people in this room right now who are Laurel residents who showed your support. Thank you. And also that spread the word. Thank you. Now I got a couple Facebook posts. I just want to thank everyone, like all of our Laurel, as someone calls them, Laurelites. Thank you, and thank you. To all of our families who came out and supported, thank you. I just can't say thank you enough for entrusting another 4 years in my hands, and that having the confidence that in spite of what some people might think that we do as a board, keep our students, first of all, at the first at the front and foremost, and as well as our staff, to really try to make sure that we have good things going on in our district. Again, I am honored to have been reelected, and I really do thank everyone who had a hand in it, big or small. I do thank you, because I don't even know who everybody is to say individually, so I'm going to say it collectively. Thank you again and again and again.
Congratulations, Mrs.
Thanks.
Mr. Nichols?
Well, I don't have a whole lot to say. What's surprising me is the year's just about over. We just started. I don't know if it's because something that comes with getting older, or whether it's something that time flies faster. This year is almost over, and I can't say if it's been a bad year. I want to see a better one next year, maybe. I mean, if you always look forward, just hope for the best. And I think Laurel kids deserve a good education, and I think we're getting them now. So I'm just going to leave it at that.
Thank you. Mrs. Pugh?
Yeah, just congratulations to Mrs. Isler.
Thank you, Ms.
And look forward to the end of the school year and all the fun things that are happening.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like, I'm a chicken grower, so it's kind of like you get one flock out and you get another one. Let's get another flock next year and do it again.
That's it. Thank you. Okay, next we have public participation, and I have a Mrs. Carol Timmons that has signed up to speak. Is she here? Oh. Okay, if you would come up front, please. Okay, Mrs. Timmons, I don't know if you're familiar with the board policy, but I have been instructed that I am to read it every time someone speaks. The board policy, we allow 5 minutes for you to speak, and persons wishing to speak for a longer period must arrange for a place on the board's agenda. Persons wishing to be placed on the agenda shall inform the superintendent of that desire in writing and the topic no later than 3 full working days prior to the day of the regular meeting of the board, which is normally the 3rd Wednesday of the month, but we always have to have it a week earlier in May. Speakers may offer objective criticism of school operations and programs, but the board will not hear complaints about school personnel or other persons at a public session. Other channels providing for board consideration of complaints involving individuals exist and shall be used. The board president shall have authority to terminate the remarks of any individual who does not adhere to the above rules. Persons appearing before the board are reminded that all their requests may be directed to the board. Action and answers to questions must be deferred pending board consideration. And when you say your first word, Mrs. Isler will set the timer. Thank you.
I'm here to speak about the violence that's happening in the schools. Changes need to be made. The board needs to work with the parents, not against them. Listen to suggestions of the parents. Do not laugh at them or simply refuse to follow up on ideas the parents give. If the administration is so confident that they are doing their job, why are some of their children not in the system? Why are they school choice to other schools? That speaks volume. Those with the power to make changes don't even have their children in this district. Why not start each board meeting with prayer? Ask God's wisdom to help you do your jobs and make these schools a better place. Apparently much help is needed, and things within this administration are so overcome with darkness and evil, only God can save his children. Parents and grandparents, you need to vote at the board elections if you want to make changes for children. And my question really is, why are the people in this community afraid to take a stand for what's right? What or who do they fear? Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, next I have Mrs. Angie Cunningham. And so I read again. You're allowed up to 5 minutes, Mrs. Cunningham. Persons wishing to speak for a longer period must arrange for a place on the board's agenda. Persons wishing to be placed on the agenda shall inform the superintendent of that desire in writing and the topic no later than 3-4 working days prior to the day of the regular meeting of the board. Speakers may offer objective criticism of school operations and programs, but the board will not hear complaints about school personnel, or other persons at a public session. Other channels providing for board consideration of complaints involving individuals exist and shall be used. The board president will have authority to terminate the remarks of any individual who does not adhere to the above rules. Persons appearing before the board are reminded that although requests may be directed to the board, action and answers to questions must be deferred pending board consideration. Okay, you ready, Ms. Ism?
Yes.
As soon as you go.
I would like to clarify the reason I'm speaking now. It is not a personal agenda, it's to be an advocate for the children. I asked to be permitted to play a video that would show some of the brutal assaults that children in the school district have faced that are posted on social media. That would speak volumes as to why I'm so passionate. However, that request was denied. I also want to clarify, my daughter was assaulted and injured in the school cafeteria in this school during lunchtime. She was not injured at a bowling alley. This seems to be a statement that has been going around from someone in administration, I have been told. If there are any questions, please feel free to look at her school record and gather the info that you need. I want to stress that parents do file grievances. However, how long do we have to wait for a resolution? A week, a month, a year, or in my case, a year and a half. As brutal as the attack against my daughter was, and all the appropriate people were notified, it goes to show you how seriously it was taken when a year and a half later, school officials do not even know what happened to her and are stating she was injured elsewhere. Some people also might not like my style, such as speaking out on social media. However, when paid public servants that are paid with our taxpayer dollars cannot keep our children safe, parents have to use other means to get the word out about what's happening. Students have been bullied and assaulted. And for people to make statements, if you don't like Laurel, take your child out of the school, if you're your school choice. If kids are assaulted and bullied, why do they have to be the one to leave the district? That's a very insensitive comment for anyone to make. Also, parents do not expect the school to babysit or raise our children. What we expect is for our paid officials to keep our children safe while they are attending school. There is a difference. A student at this school was bullied, verbally and physically. It was brought to the school's attention several times. It was a school choice student. At one point, that child decided to fight back and defend herself. But because she was school choice, the principal notified her mother that school choice students cannot have any referrals. That child, defending herself, was suspended and put on principal probation and was told any further referrals and she would have to get removed from the school. Although the principal stated she did not start the fight and she knew that she was defending herself, but the school has zero tolerance for hands-on. That policy needs to be looked at. That's not fair. Also, I request the board review their current policy about what parents can and cannot say. If parents feel the need to speak out about what's best for our children, there should be no limitations. Per the First Amendment, per the Parents' Bill of Rights, parents are protected to speak out against what is happening in the school districts for our children. Our children's lives literally depend on parents speaking out. On April the 17th, I asked the board via email, where in the policy does it protect public speakers from unethical, unprofessional treatment while speaking, as was evident in the March 15th school board meeting? I have yet to get a response. Should I not be granted the same respect that administration feels they're entitled to? If everyone's so confident, why do they fear what the parents have to say? At the board meeting, several ideas were presented last month. However, since I cannot meet with the superintendent one-on-one, no follow-up was given. Shouldn't all parents have the right to transparency? Why should it depend on me meeting with the superintendent? Every parent deserves the same answers I would get if I were meeting with them or behind closed doors. Parents are entitled to know what's going on. This is a cycle. I speak, Suggestions are offered and then nothing. So what is the point of the board meetings? If I am missing the point, then please tell me, enlighten me. Why are we here? Why did we do this? I was able to meet with the governor's office last week and share my concerns, my frustrations, and able to share the obstacles that parents face when they speak out at board meetings, and why new parents are hesitant to do so. I referred them to a video from March 15th. I will continue to use all platforms to make my voice heard to fight for the children. For those who do not like my style, spend a day talking to the students that have been forever traumatized by incidents that they have encountered while simply trying to get an education. And since the board seems to like certain quotes, I will quote Michael Jackson. For those who want to tell you there are no issues with violence and not be truthful about what's going on in the school district, per the Michael Jackson quote, lies run sprints, the truth runs marathons. And I will continue this marathon to the finish line to speak to be an advocate.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, financial report. Ms. Horsey? Mrs. Horsey.
Good evening.
Laurel, Director of Finance. An update from our meeting last month. We submitted the year annual report to the Department of Education and our fourth quarter bond bill report to Office of Management and Budget, and also the financial position report, which the board did at last month's meeting, submitted to the Department of Education. We had a really good turnout of applicants for our Citizen Budget Oversight Committee. So I will be sending out notifications to the following individuals, and appreciation for them, submitting applications. So I'd like to put out that, Mr. Matthew Parker, he's a Laurel School District resident and also brings finance experience. Ms. Shelley Whaley, she's a Laurel School District parent and also has banking experience. Ms. Aisha Niblett, she's a Laurel School District parent and also an employee in our district office. And Mr. Andrew Hartstein, a Laurel School District parent, and he also has finance experience. Ms. Laura Gibbons, Laurel School District parent, and she also brings municipal finance experience from the town of Georgetown. And Ms. Jacqueline Sorrells, a Laurel School District resident, and she also brings education experience from Worcester County Public Schools. So things we have coming up, still
waiting on the security cameras for Nalela, that we have about 9 cameras that were back ordered. All the wiring is completed, just waiting on the cameras to come in. Our local funds audit for fiscal year 22 is in process. And our school construction audit for FY20 has no update. And also our enhanced MCI allocation, we'll be waiting for that probably in the fall. We'll be starting our June 30 end of fiscal year closeout procedures and getting ready for fiscal year 24. We're working on the units and positions plan for fiscal year 24, and also our fiscal year 24 tax warrant and preliminary budget, which will be presented at the June board meeting. And we're also working on the consolidated grant application with our early submission deadline, July 17th. Now look at the reserve fund. It's still following the trend from the prior year. You notice that it is above the black line from last year. We have received more receipts right now as compared to the same time frame last year. That's why it's still above. Any questions?
No? Any questions from anyone?
Just, good work getting the Citizens Oversight, Budget Oversight Committee together. Laura,
Sorry.
Yeah.
I said, good job on the Citizens Budget Oversight Committee.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Unfinished business, the second reading, IKE promotion policy. Recommend the second reading of IKE promotion policy as submitted and found on the district website in the Board of Education policy section and as found at the Laurel School District sites. This policy was available for review by the community at the Laurel School District buildings and on the district website. Do I have a first?
So moved.
Mrs. Isler, second. Mrs. Pugh. Roll call vote. Mrs. Isler?
Approve.
Mrs. Pugh?
Approved.
And Mr. Nichols? Approved. So approved. School choice. Recommend approval of school choice as a group.
So moved.
First, Mrs. Pugh, second, Mr. Nichols. Roll call vote. Mrs. Pugh?
Approved.
Mr. Nichols? Approved. And Mrs. Isler?
Approved.
So approved. Recommend approval of school choice as submitted.
So moved.
First, Mr. Nichols, second, Mrs. Pugh. Roll call vote. Mr. Nichols?
Approved.
Mrs. Pugh?
Approved.
And Mrs. Isler?
Approve.
So approved. Recommend to approve school choice, wait a minute, that was a seven, never mind. Okay, fundraisers. Recommend approval of fundraisers as a group.
So moved.
First, Mrs. Pugh.
Second.
Second, Mrs. Isler. Roll call vote, Mrs. Pugh.
Approved.
Mrs. Isler.
Approve.
And Mr. Nichols.
Approved.
So approved. Recommend approval of fundraisers as submitted.
So moved.
First, Mrs. Pugh.
Second.
Second, Mr. Nichols. Roll call vote, Mrs. Pugh.
Approved.
Mr. Nichols.
Approved.
And Mrs. Isler.
Approved.
So approved. Rentals. Recommend to approve request of Rusty Brown Delmarva Blast Soccer Club for use of Laurel Middle High School athletic field from July 17th through the 20th, 2023, from 8:30 a.m. to 3:30 p.m. to host progressive soccer summer camp for the youth in the Laurel community. Cost is $150. Certificate of liability insurance is on file.
Recommend approval of use of facility fee and custodial fees waived.
Okay, we have from Mrs. Isler, recommend an approval, use of facility fee and custodial fee waived. Do I have a second?
Second.
Mr. Nichols, second. Mrs. Pugh?
Approved.
Mrs. Isler?
Approved.
And Mr. Nichols?
Approved.
So approved. Professional trips, recommend approval of trips as a group.
So moved.
First, Mrs. Pugh.
Second.
Second, Mr. Nichols. Roll call vote, Mrs. Pugh.
Approved.
Mr. Nichols?
Approved.
And Ms. Isler?
Approved.
Mrs. Isler, approved. Recommend approval of trips as submitted.
So moved.
First, Mr. Nichols.
Second.
Second, Mrs. Pugh. Roll call vote, Mr. Nichols.
Approved.
Mrs. Pugh.
Approved.
And Mrs. Isler.
Approved.
So approved. Laurel School District 2022 and 2023 school calendar change for students in grades KN through 11 for June 8th and 9th, which recommend to approve the 2022-2023 school calendar changes for students in KN through 11 that will now be a half a day on June 8th, 2023, and with the last student day as a half a day on June 9th, as a result of unused surplus days built into the calendar for weather-related school cancellations.
So moved.
First, Mrs. Pugh.
Second.
Second, Mrs. Isler. Roll call vote, Mrs. Pugh.
Approved.
Mrs. Isler.
Approved.
And Mr. Nichols.
Approved.
So approved. 2023-2024 Law School District Board of Education meeting schedule. Recommend to approve the 2023-2024 Laurel Board of Education meeting schedule as submitted.
So moved.
Second.
First, Mrs. Pugh, second, Mr. Nichols. Roll call vote, Mrs. Pugh.
Approved.
Mr. Nichols.
Approved.
And Mrs. Isler.
Approved.
So approved. Hold up. 2023 Law School District Summer Hours Schedule. Approve the 2023 District Summer Hours Schedule as submitted.
So moved.
First, Mrs. Pugh.
Second.
Second, Mrs. Isler. Roll call vote, Mrs. Pugh.
Approved.
Mrs. Isler.
Approved.
And Mr. Nichols.
Approved.
So approved. Possible action on executive session. Hold on. Gracious sakes, is this stuck together? No. Resolutions, recommendations for personnel action for the May 10th Board of Education meeting. Be it resolved that the Laurel School District Board of Education approve recommended personnel actions list identified on attachment A in executive session. Be it resolved that the Laurel School District Board of Education authorize that notice of termination of services at the end of the current school year be sent to affected professional employees who are on temporary contracts identified on attachment B in executive session. Be it resolved that the Laurel School District Board of Education approve notice of termination of services of support staff due to temporary employment being sent to affected employees identified on attachment C in executive session. Be it resolved that the Laurel School District Board of Education approve recommended personnel actions identified on attachment D in executive session. Be it resolved that the Laurel School District Board of Education approve recommended personnel actions identified on attachment E in executive session. Personnel attachment A, this is professional. Recommend approving the personnel recommendations as listed in attachment A.
So moved.
First, Mrs. Pugh, second, Mrs. Isler, roll call vote, Mrs. Pugh,
Approved.
Mrs. Isler, and Mr. Nichols.
Approved.
So approved. Personnel attachment B, teacher temporary contract, non-renewals. Recommend approving the personnel recommendations as listed in attachment B.
So moved.
First, Mrs. Pugh, second, I believe it was Mrs. Isler.
Yeah.
Roll call vote, Mrs. Pugh,
Approved.
Mrs. Isler,
Approved.
and Mr. Nichols.
Approved.
So approved. Personnel attachment C, support staff, temporary position, non-renewals. Recommend approving the personnel recommendations as listed in attachment C.
So moved.
First, Mrs. Pugh,
Second.
second, Mr. Nichols. Roll call vote, Mrs. Pugh,
Approved.
Mr. Nichols,
Approved.
and Mrs. Isler.
Approved.
So approved. Personnel attachment D, support staff. Recommend approving the personnel recommendations as listed in attachment D.
So moved.
First, Mr. Nichols,
Second.
second, Mrs. Pugh. Roll call vote, Mr. Nichols,
Approved.
Mrs. Pugh,
Approved.
and Ms. Isler. Mrs. Isler. So approved. Personnel attachment E, cafeteria. Recommend approving the personnel recommendations as listed in attachment E.
So moved.
First, Mrs. Isler,
Second.
second, Mrs. Pugh. Roll call vote, Mrs. Isler,
Approved.
Mrs. Pugh,
Approved.
and Mr. Nichols.
Approved.
So approved. The regular board meeting is scheduled for Wednesday, June 21st, 2023 at 7 p.m. right here in the Laurel Middle High School cafeteria. Do I have a motion? We adjourn.
So moved.
First, Mrs. Isler, second, Mrs. Pugh. Roll call vote, Mrs. Isler,
Approved.
Mrs. Pugh,
Approved.
and Mr. Nichols.
Approved.
So approved. I'm adjourning at 7:39 p.m. Thanks to everyone.